Hey educators, one of the biggest challenges of beginning early childhood educators and teachers is to choose what type of observation tool to use when observing children. Anecdotal records, running records, learning stories, jottings, they all are different and require different approaches and skills. When to use anecdotal records and when to choose learning stories, or maybe the checklist will do in this particular scenario. Today's video is going to cover all that as I will walk through brief definitions of each of the observation types and give you some good examples. We also will talk about strengths and weaknesses. So tune in to watch till the end. The way we observe children doesn't only affect how we view the learning, but also how we teach, how we plan, and also how we share this documentation with children, families, and community. Today, we are going to explore the main types of observations, starting with anecdotal observations. Anecdotal observations are the most common type of observations. That's a brief, objective, specific description of child's behavior, their play, their learning, some particular event. The key here is that it's written in the past tense. For example, you probably will see those ones a lot. On 15th of July at 10:30 a.m. while playing with building blocks, Sarah stacked 10 blocks one on top of the other without them falling. She then clapped her hands and smiled proudly. Typical anecdotal observation. A lot of these observations are online. If you Google observations in early childhood education and care or child care observations, we don't like this term, but it's there. You also will be able to see them a lot in textbooks. That's the most basic type of observation that educators are learning, and it's probably the easiest one to learn as well, in my opinion. The key here is to follow the script. Yes, so provide detailed recollection of what happened. For example, today at Bottle Brush Room, we went on a bushwalk with a group of 3-year-old children, and they seemed to enjoy watching kangaroos, and they saw 3 cockatoos. They were very inspired, and when they came home, they pretended to be birds. That's just an example. It's a vague recollection of what happened, but it is the most common type of observations, and it's pretty easy to write. What is the weakness of this observation? In my opinion, because it's very common, it gives you limited context of the observed behavior. So if you want to observe a pattern, it's better to use different types of observations. It's also quite time consuming. I remember sitting during my break as a graduate teacher and typing frantically like Jim Carrey in one of those memes that go around the internet, and Ice Ventura, yes. And I was trying to write this story, and it took about 20 minutes because I wanted to fit in a lot of details. Is that really necessary? The question is. What assessment is, it's always important to remember the why we assess. And if you're following me for quite some time, you know that I love mind maps. And of course, I have a mind map on that too. Assessment, according to Department of Education in Victoria, is how each child progressing developmentally. So anecdotal observations can give you some good snapshots for that. It's to identify whether additional support is required. Yes, you can actually fit in some details in there. What they know and what they can do, focusing on skills and dispositions. I'd say that anecdotal observations do focus on skills and knowledge, but they are not really focusing on dispositions. For that, we have learning stories. Physical health. Yes, they do assess physical health. It really is a lens. You can apply anecdotal observations to any type of activities, yes, and describe them in the past. Attachment patterns. Yes, you can focus on that. You can also consider emotional well-being and relationships and friendships. Again, they fit nicely in the next type of observations, narrative observations. Alternatively, you can do sociograms and learning stories, which is part of narrative observations. I'd say that anecdotal observations are great in most cases, but they also can be combined with better tools. Now we are moving on towards second type of observations, which is narrative observations. Narrative observations actually include learning stories because stories are narratives, right? This is more detailed and comprehensive written accounts of child's activities, behavior, interactions. It's a story. So if you think about narrative, it is a story. It's got the beginning, the middle part, and the end, and it's aligned with storytelling techniques. So it needs to capture the attention through the hook. It's more conversational. It's more creative. I really like narrative observations. You probably watched some videos on learning stories. If you haven't seen any examples of narrative observations, I encourage you to read this book, Learning Stories in Practice. This is my favorite book for examples of such narratives. For example, I'll read you one little story quickly. A magical moment. A few weeks ago, Dan, you came to pick up Francesca a bit earlier than usual. You were greeted by Francesca, of course, but also by the other children, in particular Callum and Anya. We were about to read a book, and Frankie insisted, "You should be the reader." You didn't seem in a hurry, sat down on the floor and started to read. Almost instantly, Callum and Anya came closer to you, and Frankie, they were a bit unsure at first, but you gave them a beautiful smile and kept reading, interacting beautifully with them. The interesting thing about this, it's a story that is addressed to a parent. And that's why narratives are amazing for us educators, because they are social cultural type of observations. Social cultural. So as you can see in this example that I've read, that it's a comprehensive and conversational. It's more details than an anecdotal record, and it's also written in the first person often, or it is addressed to someone who you're writing the story about. Lots of free examples in the book that is called EYLF Framework in Action, and I made a video about that. I'll put it under a description below as a link so you can watch this video as well. Narrative observations are also quite time consuming, as you can imagine, because you are writing a story. I'd say that ChatGPT or any other AI tool cannot write this observation for you. Why? Because it would be ChatGPT created story. You need to maybe ask for prompts or support with grammar or style, but this is a type of observation you write from your heart and you write what you see. I'd say if we look at the department understanding of assessment, it would be great as a formative type of assessment for learning. It will be also a fantastic assessment of learning, summative assessment, because you can summarize different stories in one big narrative about the year that child spent in your care. The problem is with learning stories, they are pushed by companies, especially privately owned companies, I'm not going to name them, as the only type of observation, along with photos. Not everyone can write so well. We are all at the start of our career, we are unable to find the words. That's why I created a lot of resources to support educators with finding the right words for observations, because I struggled to put things in order and especially in a beautiful way. And not everyone is able to write with flair. Narrative observations, such as learning stories, they require you to write really well, to be a little bit of a writer. If you are creative and if it's your gig and you want to try, look at examples, a lot of examples, read those examples, learn, highlight the key words, or you can use my guide and my workbook to start developing these skills, because it doesn't come naturally. Sometimes you need to work on your writing skills, and you need to start with basics and then work towards more complicated narrative observations. Developmental checklist is more structured type of assessment. That's a third type we are looking into today. They mark specific behaviors or skills. They usually are developmentally focused. That means that they align with developmental theories, not social cultural theories. They talk about whether the skills are present or absent. One of the tools that I used at the moment in kindergarten, it's called the tool, assessment tool, is somewhat a developmental checklist. Why? Because it identifies where a child is at on the scale. It's more like a scale or rating, checklist, but it does identify and put child in position. So that is developmental checklist type. It is strengths-based, but it still is a developmentally focused. And some people who like social cultural approach, they say that it's not modern, yet it does help to respond to one of the key concerns of developmental delay. For example, to identify whether the child needs professional support. And that's important, yes, to identify the need for inclusion, the need for support. Developmental checklists can help. But quite often, you need to be very careful how you use developmental checklists. Because if you use checklists, you need to observe the skill probably more than once. Yes, and as kindergarten teachers or educators, we do see children a lot, but some children come to our center or kindergarten only once a week, and it might not be enough, or you might be in different space at the moment. We can tick boxes that they're able to hold scissors with control or identify primary colors, share toys with peers, but doesn't really describe child's personality, interests, strengths, and dispositions as they asks us. No, it doesn't. What we need to consider whether developmental checklists are working along with the EYLF. And the EYLF outcomes are broad goals for children. So they're not saying that you need to observe skills, right? They don't say that they're able to communicate what they want and then you tick this box. They are becoming increasingly more confident at solving problems, or they are learning how to compare and contrast. If you look at the language of the EYLF, it's not actually a developmental checklist. So that's why use them only when you need to and when you actually have some developmental concerns, or if it's part of the tool. At the same time, you can still notice that there are some disadvantages of developmental checklists because they may oversimplify complex behavior, miss some important details or nuances. They do not show us the whole picture of the child, and they are not aligned with social cultural approach to observations, because they all assume that all children go through the same universal stages of development. And that's what Jean Piaget was saying, right? And children might actually miss a stage, or the development is cumulative and might happen overnight as well. Focus too much on deficit model rather than strengths-based model, capturing the whole child. We need to look at children holistically. It is in the it's called holistic interconnected approaches. And this type of assessment, developmental checklists, are not aligned with this type of teaching, yes, and assessment. Next one is my favorite. I think that's the one that you will start with. And it's jottings. It's easily be presented as a metaphor of sticky notes or notes or a little notepad where you scribble some thoughts and some ideas. Brief notes of keywords that children use if you are focusing on language. Brief notes about friendship moments or interests. For example, Bailey played in a butterfly corner, and Catherine was interested in exploring music of, Rihanna with Lily. It happens as well. So, for example, 10 a.m. circle time, Lily enthusiastically volunteered to answer questions. I'd say this is too long as well. I would say remove that from real jotting and say answered questions or asked questions. So usually she's quite, let's say, quiet, and she was more enthusiastic this time. Or Carter and Marcus played together in the dinosaur area for about half an hour. They built dinosaur world. Or children explored Dr. Dramatic setup and came back to this type of play after lunch. So it was very popular, I will note. So this is fastest type of observations after, I'd say, pictures. And it is a written observation. You'd scribble down. Could be done on the whiteboard, could be done on the computer, could be done on paper. Pretty universal. They're easy to use on the go, outside, in bushkinder, and everywhere, pretty much. It enables you to record any notes fast without interrupting your program. You don't have to do it on your planning time off the floor. And that's why I like jottings, because they do give you some important voice quotes of children. They give you some details that you might forget after you finished your shift because you are super tired. But at the same time, they are very brief. And lack of elaboration sometimes can lead to a misinterpretation by you or by other educators. Yeah, and incomplete understanding. So, for example, you might not jot down why child had a meltdown, right? And that's not really useful because we don't know. Next type is learning stories. I talked about learning stories. Learning stories, I have the previous book by Margaret Carr. It was a printout that I printed from my Monash University library, and I bound it, and it was my first book to make a lot of notes. But they are originated from New Zealand, and I have a long video on learning stories making, and I have a video about learning stories with examples as well. But learning stories are international now, right? They started in New Zealand, yet they became popular because they are truly magnificent. Last session I attended about learning stories developed by Wendy Lee celebrated my approach to observations, which is amazing. They weave through New Zealand language of nations and that Maldi, and let's say called children tamariki, and they embed those words a lot. You still will see pictures. Of course, stories are narratives, yet they are structured in a specific way. They are focusing on dispositions, and of course, their key focus is on learning. I guess it should be really for all assessments, but they are focusing on dispositions, and dispositions are long term of children, thinking habits, learning habits, for example, persistence, greed, taking an interest, curiosity. And these are important dispositions and opinions. Even if you are not doing learning stories, consider assessing children for dispositions. And this links really well to outcome from the EYLF. If you are not from Australia, consider what is very similar to F and the outcome, or you might call it differently, a point in your curriculum framework that refers to those thinking skills and learning dispositions. So that's an example. They all are prickly. Of course, that's a short example because I cannot put the whole learning story here. While exploring the sensory table, Aidan expressed fascination with different textures. As she the cone, she said, la la la. This continuous story, and it will be also addressed to Aidan's parents or Aidan herself, captures unique learning journey. Interesting. As I was saying, reading this book all the time and making notes, highlighting some of my favorite stories. They could be about babies, they could be about toddlers, they could be about any type of age. And I'll read you one as well, just to demonstrate how wonderful learning stories are. Talofa Lily. Talofa, big warm welcome to you and your family, Vanau. I am looking forward to getting to know you and supporting you to establish a sense of well-being and belonging in your new environment. Lily, today was your first day in the nursery. You enjoyed playing on the floor and had a lovely big smile and sociable wee girl. You seem very relaxed and social wee girl. Tina came to visit and sang to you in Samoan. I'm having a familiar face, you said. Who is your face? Mom recorded your daily routines for me, and you certainly let me know when you were hungry and tired. You even settled yourself off to sleep in your new bed. And it continues. As you can see, it's very personal, it's very conversational. It's as if we are having this yarn or dialogue. Wonderful type of observation. The drawback, of course, there is one, requires skill in reflective interpreting writing. It also is a specific approach that you need to learn about. I'm still learning. I still don't know how to write learning stories. I'm not 100%, so be a learner with me and let's do it together. Next one is a running record, something that you probably covered at TAFE or RTO if you studied Certificate 3 in Australia. If you study elsewhere in college, then you covered this too. It's a very classical type of observation, detailed, continuous, objective record that is written in the present tense. If you remember, anecdotal record is written in the past time tense. This one is in the present tense. During this observation, you are to capture as much detail as possible. For example, 9 o'clock, Aidan to the book corner. 9:01, he picked deer with the book. 9:02, ran outside holding a book. 9:03, raised his voice and walked on tippy toes. 9:05, sat down with an educator to read a book. So what you are looking at, usually some depths and playing, so looking for some patterns, could be attachment patterns, could be social behavior, could be any focus area, and it provides rich continuous stream of data on child's behavior. Usually it's hard to do when you are on the, but it does provide you rich continuous information, as I said. Minus or drawback is it requires you to sit down and concentrate only on observing children. Do we really have time to do that? Okay, events is next one. I'm going to make the next long video on event sample because it is a type of observation that most of my pre-service students, educators struggled with. It's of usually behavior, yes, but also capturing the context. Event sample is often used for reading assessments, literacy assessments or numeracy assessment. It observes how often child does something or doesn't. Occurrence, frequency. For example, yes, so sharing is a complex skill really. You can focus on turn taking, you can focus on initiated interaction. That's a very important one for social development. Basically, you need to get the developmental that are still valid, they're going to be updated soon, and start using these developmental milestones and tick bullets. Often this happens. To make this observation successful, you need to have pretty good understanding what you're assessing, which is true for all types of observations. Usually it is focusing heavily on behavior, and as you can guess, not really social, amazing, beautiful, pro-social, but behavior that might be troubling or might be consistent with some types of neurodiversity. What is this type of observation? As I was saying, it is pretty complex for students who are new to the industry to understand. It requires specific template, kind of, and it means broader patterns of behavior or interactions. Yet, not to use it completely, I'd say missed opportunity to measure something with the right tool. You can be respectful towards the child, but you need to also identify the areas of growth or areas where a child needs support. Next one is profile. You can portfolio. So usually it's a comprehensive summary of child's development, including strengths, needs, and progress. Here we go. Profile or portfolio. This profile as summative assessment or assessment of learning according to Department of Education and Training or EYLF. You are covering all the key areas. And one of the examples of This profile or summative assessment is a report. And the kindergarten, if you're working in kindergarten assessment goes through communication, interactions, communication symbols, identity and community, social, learning and communication, numeracy, thinking skills, learning dispositions, and well-being emotions, well-being movement. So as you can see, it's pretty detailed, it's comprehensive overview of child's current abilities. I also would add that it is measured over time and it's collated into one big folder or a digital portfolio that shows different ways child interacted with you, with peers, with community. That's an amazing one. It might have samples, it might have anecdotal records, might have jottings, event samples, learning stories, etc. And there is that you need a lot of time to collate it, to present it, or need a good right tool. So that's why I think department created the assessment tool to make it more accessible, that's a mistake, but accessible too. So easily done. You want to do it collaboratively. It's not just you who writes all this, but other educators contribute. So it's a collaborative tool and it's very time consuming. But if you do observations according to your schedule, I think you will collate a lot of information over the period of time child attends your service. Next one is easy type of observation. Sample of child's work samples such as drawings, writings, or to assess progress. In services, it's done now. It's still on paper. In some outstanding services that follow Reggio Emilia approach or inspired by Reggio Emilia, because they celebrate representative skills of ability to make meaning through drawings, through art, through dance. Samples of child's work, whether it's clay, Play-Doh, writing, sample artwork, wire, sculpture, are very important to show tangible. And this is great evidence of skills development. For example, child started with scribble and then wrote their name at the end of the term or the year. And that shows creativity, of course. Yes, so it shows all that you had in your center, and it captures aspects of child development and skills. The key here is not to collate samples of cookie cutter projects or activities, forgive me for this word, but that's what I got as a parent from Russian kindergarten where my son went to. There were cutter crafts that I didn't see any personality, any of his drawings. Meanwhile, at home, I have a box of my child's drawings that are amazing because they're cute, they're unique, they're about ninjas and Bruce Lee and who knows what. It's very sample, yes, children's work. The key here is to add to the sample. This way you will capture all aspects of child development. In my opinion, samples work really well with a little bit of commentary. So for example, if we have, I'm looking for examples, if you picture of child creation of in the area, you are building a telescope, because otherwise it would just look like a block construction that you don't know what this is. Notes is very important. Or painting a pirate flag, right? So you might capture something. Or maggot cream that they made in the sandpit. Lots of pictures that people take are often not contextualized, and I've seen it. I've seen educators just tick, tick, tick. They are not really focusing on what's happening. They didn't spend enough time there to understand what child is doing. So all these samples are not useful without you understanding what's behind it. About this sample here, I can tell you everything. Yeah, I can tell you that that was a group of preschool children that I brought new resource that is called Memory game with, and they were stickers of dogs, different dog breeds, and children also exposed to toy dogs that I brought some dramatic play, I don't know, prompts. And they could dress up their dogs and they could go for a walk, they could wash, pretend to everything for pretend play. I also placed clipboard and paper there because children have 100. Thank you, Loris Malaguzzi, for that. And I believe graphic languages help children to express what they think. And this child, he decided to draw a picture of the dog and he started to color it in, and it was amazing because you can see it's a green dog and it is a dog as he sees it. Amazing sample. And then you can ask, is it your dog, or is it the dog you want, or is it the dog of your neighbor or grandma, etc. So many conversations to have about graphic and the projects, and samples give us insight. So next one is transcripts of child conversations. I like these ones. They are quite amazing and I use them a lot as a student. I didn't use them as a teacher because I never could have time for that, although I did capture a few moments on video, and then now with AI you can transcribe it, but also we have child safety protocols in place, so you wouldn't be able to take all these transcripts or recordings to transcribe at home. So it should be all done on the floor. So only usually used as part of research projects, but it could be an amazing tool for assessing a language and making it visible. You will capture the exact words, phrases, pronunciation of children. You will identify some keywords. You can create a word map, and that's our type of assessment. But as I said, it's time consuming. It's now because you cannot take your iPads out of the service, so it all should be done on the floor. With 20 children, it's not always possible. Next one is language vocabulary maps. So visual representation of child expanding vocabulary of language skills. So it's basically like that. So you can use a map and write, let's say, cat, cup, daddy, whatever they say, in child's language as well, not in the way. And this captures language, and then you can compare to expectations. You can talk to speech pathologists as well if you have concerns about child speech delay development, and this captures the complexity of language and whether it is developmentally appropriate, but also reflects child's culture. If you can do it with parents, you also can capture their vocabulary in their first language if they have another language they speak. Finally, summative assessment, one of the type transition report. Because we're about formative assessment, I'm gonna stop here and I'll make a second video on the different types of observations. Make sure to watch part 2 if you are interested to learn more about different types of assessments. Thank you for watching and see you in the part 2. If this even mildly helpful, do yourself a favor and hit subscribe. It's free and it helps algorithm to see Storykate channel and help more educators like you.